My name is Kevin Martin. I am one of the physiotherapists and managers at Lakeshore East. I'll be presenting shortly, but we're just going to wait a few more minutes for everyone to join here. Just FYI, we do have another lecture series webinar next week on Wednesday. It's going to be going over yoga practices and how to avoid shoulder injuries and adjusting different techniques with that. And then also during this presentation, we have Rebecca, who's a physiotherapist at my clinic, and Ashley, who is the head of our marketing department, joining me. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat button and ask them questions as I'm going along. And then at the very end of this, I'll make sure that set aside some time to answer some questions too. So we'll just wait like another minute or so, and then we'll get going. All right, looks like we got 14 of us right now. So we're just gonna go ahead right now, and then hopefully some more people will join. All right, so today I'm gonna be talking about impingement injuries in the shoulder, tendinopathies. This is a very common injury that we see at the clinic, one of the most common injuries that we see. And I really wanted to talk about it because I feel like one of the most preventable injuries we see, and you see it a lot with lifters. And the reason they're just doing certain exercises or techniques or adjustments they could make that would avoid these injuries. So I figure we'd talk a little bit about it beforehand, and hopefully you guys have some good questions. So first we'll talk a little bit about the anatomy of the shoulder, then we'll go over the shoulder mechanics. And then common reason injuries occur in the clinic, some self-assessments you guys could do at home to see if you guys might be suffering from some type of shoulder impingement, and then some exercises you guys could actually implement at home to be preventable, or if you are experiencing some pain, to actually be proactive and avoid some pain. So here's the anatomy of the shoulder. This would be looking at the skeletal model. So we have three bones here. We got the scapula, which is your shoulder blade, and this is the anterior shoulder. So this would be looking at it from the front side. So we got the scapula, the humerus, and the clavicle. So basically your shoulder blade, your arm bone, and then your collarbone. And then from the back side, we see the shoulder, the same thing, the scapula, humerus, and clavicle, and we see the spine of the scapula right here, and that separates our rotator cuff tendons, which we'll talk about. But one of the other things I want you guys to appreciate is on that humerus or arm bone, it's a ball and socket joint right there. So at the end of that bone, it's kind of like a golf ball on a tee. And so it has to fit nice and perfect and have good congruency in that shoulder joint as it moves. And that's really important to keep in mind as we talk about some things later in this lecture. So remember that ball and socket or golf ball and tee example that I talked to you about. So this would be if we put the muscles on the actual shoulder blade. So on the left side is the posterior view, or from the back side of the shoulder. In total, we have 4 rotator cuff tendon muscles. We have our infraspinatus, our teres minor, supraspinatus, and subscapularis. But we'll first talk about the infraspinatus and teres minor on the left side of the picture, and these are our external rotators. So these are the muscles that rotate our arm outwards. And then we got our supraspinatus muscle up top, and that is the muscle that lifts our arm out to the side. Then if we go and look at the front of the shoulder from that anterior view, we got our subscapularis. And that muscle is going to do the opposite action of those external rotators. It's going to go inwards. But one of the things I really want everyone to take a look at, and it's going to be a big point of the lecture, is what's going on right where it says acromion. So you could see the clavicle meets your scapula at the acromion. That's like the ceiling of your shoulder joint, and underneath it is your supraspinatus tendon. And so that's where the muscle has to work with. And a lot of what this impingement occurs is when there's not enough space. So that's called your subacromial joint space, is when that muscle jams up and hits that ceiling, and then we start having issues. So we'll talk a little bit more why that happens and what the effects are. I want everyone to just kind of appreciate right where it says acromion, where that muscle is, that's where the impingement tends to occur a lot. So here's another picture just zoomed in on that subacromial impingement syndrome. So if you imagine that tendon or muscle, imagine it like a rope going over a piece of metal. If there's not enough space, it starts shearing that rope, and that rope starts to fray, and you start getting little micro tears, or you develop some tendinopathies or impingement in that shoulder, leading to some type of dysfunction. That usually happens at that supraspinatus, but could happen at a couple of the other rotator cuff tendons. And like I said, it's all at this subacromial joint space right there. So hopefully that's making sense for everybody. Here's another picture from, this would be if we're looking from the shoulder from the side angle. And that's another look at that joint space and how little that rotator cuff tendon has the move as you lift your arm overhead. So if that space is elevated, that muscle is going to jam that ceiling of that joint space and start shearing that muscle. Okay, so this would be if we looked at the muscle almost like under a microscope. And we see that tendon is where the muscle attaches to the bone. And we see normally tendons run in parallel, just like this. But if you could develop some kind of tendinopathy, all the fibers start looking all frayed like a rope and become this like disorganized tissue matrix. And over time, that tissue becomes less strong and could start breaking down. And this is when people are susceptible to chronic rotator cuff tears, is because over time, this tissue has started to degenerate because of poor mechanics, either from impingement or tendinopathy or whatnot, and it could lead to a full-blown tear in that muscle. So that's why this is really important to be preventative with some of the exercises we'll show you today. All right, so now we're gonna go over the biomechanics. And I'm gonna be talking about a lot of different things, and I just want you to get some of the big picture points here. I know I'm throwing a lot of anatomy and things out there, but one of the big things we talk about is the scapulohumeral rhythm, and this is defined as the ratio of the glenohumeral movement, so how much the arm bone moves compared to how much the scapula or shoulder blade moves. So if we bring our arm out to the side and go 180 degrees like so, 60 of that degrees is going to be from your shoulder blade, and another 120 is going to be from that arm bone or humerus. And so there's this perfect 1-to-2 ratio. And the reason why we have that is what we talked about a few slides ago, is to maintain that nice joint congruency and that joint space as you lift up, going this way. And so what happens is that shoulder blade upwardly rotates, posteriorly tilts, and externally rotates as you lift your arm overhead. So right here, you can appreciate there's all these different muscles that attach to that scapular or shoulder blade that are going to affect this movement, right? And so there's this like complex timing and coordination of your shoulder muscles that controls this rhythm. And you could see if one of those muscles is too tight or overworked and very strong, or one of the muscles is not as strong or weaker, it's going to throw that rhythm off, and that angle at which it goes up might not fit that perfect 1-to-2 ratio. And what usually results is then that joint space we talked about closes down, that tendon hits the roof or that ceiling right there and pinches it. So we'll talk a little bit more detail about some of these muscles that are attached, but it's really important that all these muscles kind of work as one unit in sync. And when that becomes abnormal is usually when things, you start developing some type of pathology in that shoulder. So some of the common overactive muscles are Pec Major or minor. So the pecs are the muscles in the front of our chest. The major is the big one, and that is going to bring your shoulder across this way and internally rotate you. So it's going to bring you like this. So if you ever see guys at the gym who are overly developed, their shoulders are really rounded forward. Same thing that pec minor, it's gonna tip that shoulder forward when it's really tight or overused. Our upper trap is up top here. Is a lot of times when you're working on the computer, you get really tight, you get tightness or trigger points in here, and that's because we're shrugging our shoulders as we're typing. And then our internal rotators, which we talked about, our subscap, our pecs, our lats, those are the ones that rotate our shoulders in this way. So those are the common overactive muscles. And what that does is that decreases that subacromial joint space because they're too tight or overused. And then on the other end, we have these weak or muscles, your serratus anterior, mid and lower trap and external rotators. They're fighting for their dear life to try to pull you back in the correct position. So your serratus anterior featured on that bottom, that's what brings that shoulder blade out to the side. Your mid and lower trap is gonna pinch that shoulder blade nice and close to your spine, and then the external rotators are gonna rotate you out and open up that chest. Okay, so why would we develop some of these common imbalances? What's with overuse? And one of the big things is poor posture. So we like to talk about the anterior versus the posterior chain. So that just means the front of your body versus the back of your body, the muscles there. So we tend to, if you look at this gentleman, this picture, we've all been there where we're slouched over the computer. We're doing this for hours at a time. That anterior chain is getting really, really tight and overdeveloped because you're constantly using that over a period of several hours, while the posterior chain on the backside is getting stretched out this way. And so what happens is it leads to your pecs being really tight, your upper traps being really tight, and the internal rotators being tight, and then the muscles that are supposed to pinch your shoulder blades become really weak. And then another reason is these unbalanced training regimens. So people who go to the gym and they never focus on flexibility and mobility. So you sit at a desk all day, you wind up like this, and then you're going and lifting heavy weights overhead, you're bench pressing, you're doing things, and you haven't addressed all these muscle imbalances and compensatory things you've been doing all day at the office. And that's going to lead to some type of impingement later on because you're throwing off the whole mechanics of the shoulder joint. You're not balanced. The other thing is this emphasis on strengthening your anterior chain muscles. You see this with a lot of men trying to get the show muscles. They bench press, they do a lot of exercises in the front here, and they don't focus as much on your back muscles. So it creates this muscle imbalance. And then the last one you see is sometimes with pitchers, you get a lot of overuse injuries. So pitchers are constantly rotating their arm backwards this way. And so that overuse creates excessive range of motion actually in that way. And it causes that arm bone to slide in a way where it goes forward and downwards and creates this instability and impingement in the shoulder as well. So the big one though we'll be focusing on today is the poor posture and the poor training regimens and how to adjust those. So one of the things as a physical therapist we tend to look for is what everything looks like at rest, right? So is there right-sided versus left-sided asymmetries? Is one shoulder more elevated than the other? Is one shoulder rotated out to the side more? Is it winging out this way? Do you have this forward head, rounded shoulder posture? These are all things we want to look at rest, because if things are faulty at rest, usually when you start to move, it's going to tell us things are even more biomechanically at fault. So one of the things here I want to go over is ways in which you guys at home could see are you having postural issues that you're not aware of? What are ways you could self-assess this to see if you guys are having these problems at home? You might not be having shoulder impingement or pain, or might not be a weightlifter, but you could be developing some type of tendinopathies without you knowing, or it could lead to neck pain down the road. So some good things we could do at home just to self-assess. And number one is pretty self-explanatory, is just looking yourself in the mirror, seeing just where you tend to rest. Do you tend to have this rounded upper spine? Does your head tend to be forward? Where do you tend to sit at? The other one, which gets a little bit more specific, is this wall spinal alignment. So I'm going to show you that one right now. Hopefully you guys could see me. So what you want to be able to do is first, you're going to have a little bend in your knees. So if you're doing this along at home, grab a wall, have a little bend in your knees, and you're going to start with your butt against the wall. Then you're going to push your low back flush against the wall. Then you're going to try to pinch your shoulders against the wall, and then your head and your palm should be facing upwards. And this whole time, you should be able to keep every part of that spine from your low butt up to your head, touching against the wall. And if you feel your head's tipping forward like this, or this is a big struggle for you to do at home, usually that means that you have some of that anterior chain tightness and that poor mobility in your thoracic or cervical spine that's making that so difficult to do. So that's one red flag right there. The other one, you could do it on the floor at home. So, same concept. You're lying on the floor and you're trying to get everything flush to the ground. So, low back, mid back, and your cervical spine or neck. And you're going to have your arms at a 90-90 position here. So, I'm going to start, I'm going to tilt my low back flat, and then I'm going to do a chin tuck. And I'm going to try to keep my shoulders, elbows, and forearms flat against the floor. This is actually a struggle for me, right? And that should actually be pretty easy for most. If it's difficult, that's another example that we have some major anterior chain tightness going on that we need to address. So this one? Okay. Other ones we could do. Actually, let me, so you guys could see, is looking at your shoulder mobility, right? You should be able to, with that arm, is to go out to the side like a snow angel and get full range of motion, just going like this. If you got impingement, the classical impingement is between like 60 and 120 degrees. That feels a little uncomfortable right there. Below it, you're fine. Above it, you're fine. But right in this spot, you have some pain. That's because that joint space tends to be the smallest between those two ranges of motion. So that's an indicator that you have some subacromial impingement. The other one is you should be able to turn your thumb downwards like this and be able to go up, all the way up with your arm without dealing with any type of shoulder pain. If you do have some pain with that, it's indicated that you might have some impingement in your shoulder. Okay, another one you want to do, and you could try doing it with the shoulder that, if you're experiencing shoulder pain today, start with the one that doesn't hurt, is you're going to tap your shoulder, opposite shoulder, and then you're going to lift your elbow up to 90 degrees like so. If that is uncomfortable or painful, that usually means you're getting some impingement in that shoulder. So then I'm going to do it the opposite side. Go right there and just get a comparison side to side. And if one's a little pinchy or painful, that could indicate some impingement. Another thing to talk about, you know, is we're making some generalizations here, but sometimes people actually have the problem where they have too much mobility and they're double jointed, they're loosey-goosey throughout their joints. And in this case, they actually need to emphasize strength training and stability training versus mobility, because mobility is a problem. They have too much mobility. But in general, I tend to see individuals who have this lack of mobility problem that's contributing to this. Okay, so what do we do about it? And the big thing we like to do in therapy is mobilize and stabilize. So the goal is to optimize your mobility through active muscle releases and stretches. So everything we're trying to do is counteract the muscle imbalances that we talked about that are created by stress with the shoulder shrugs, poor posture, other things you're doing, watching Netflix all day, during this epidemic, things that are leading to these muscle imbalances throughout the day. So we got to mobilize those tissues and then strengthen the weak ones. So improved mobility means improved postural alignment, improved muscle length tension relationships, which causes improved mechanics, and we get more balance. So some of the exercises we'll go over today is I want to stress and release that anterior chain, the front of our body, and some of the cervical spine muscles, and then mobilize that thoracic spine in the mid-back and then in your cervical spine as well, because that thoracic and cervical spine tends to always be rounded. We're always forward this way. We're never extended going back the other way. So it's just reversing all those daily stresses. And the last thing is to strengthen your posterior chain, the muscles that pinch your shoulder blades together, and then these deep cervical neck flexors. These are the ones that give us that good upright posture. One thing we like to talk about in the weightlifting world is push to pull ratio. You always want to try to do 2 pull exercises for 1 push. So for every bench press exercise that you're doing that's pushing away, you want to do some type of row or reverse fly that's bringing your shoulder blades together. All right, so big thing here we really stress at React Physical Therapy is the positive benefits of an active soft tissue release. And not a lot of people know what that is, so I wanted to go over that really quickly. So active soft tissue release really focuses on relieving tissue tension via the removal of muscle adhesions that develop in a muscle. And this is due to repetitive overuse or adaptive shortening. So what you're doing is you're pinning that adhesive point while you're pulling that surrounding muscle tissue in order to release that restriction in that muscle. And there's usually multiple spots of restriction with certain muscles that we tend to find throughout the body. And you'll find this through other lecture series that, you know, when we're talking about the hips, it happens a lot in our hip flexors. And it usually tends to be this common theme of the muscles in the front of our body is what gets really tight, gets overused and develop these restrictions. So big difference between a release and stretching is the stretching brings you to that point of restriction, right? Where releasing breaks up that restriction and that adhesion that was there, then that allows that muscle to get even more length and be able to get to its full muscle length capacity. So how much it could actually lengthen to its max capability because those restrictions are out. So it gets more basically elasticity in that muscle. Another common question we get is how long should I release? I usually say it depends. You know, if you're first starting out for this, you got to do it every single day, and it's not going to be comfortable. You're going to points of tenderness, so it should be a little painful, but you shouldn't be recreating whatever pain you have. So if you have shoulder pain right here, that shouldn't be recreated by any of these releases. In general, you're doing it for a few minutes, but it just depends on what you need. You're doing it until you feel that muscle start to relax and not hurt so much, and you feel some better mobility afterwards. All right, so let's go over and actually get to some demos now. So 2 muscles I'm going to show you of releases are our pec release and our lat release. Lats are behind our shoulder blade. That's one of the muscles that really internally rotates us, and the pecs also pull those shoulders forward. So we're trying to loosen that up. The other thing we're going to go over is mobilizing your thoracic spine, so your mid-back, and then stretching your neck. And these are easy stuff you could do at home. A lot of the stuff I selected for things to show you guys is things you could do at home right now. No one has access to a gym, so these are easy things you could do as long as you have a foam roll and lacrosse ball. So if you have one of those at home, if you want to join along, you could grab that right now. I'll start to show you some of these. Still see me? Just this.
Yeah. No, I see her.
Oh, you still see that. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. So first one here is for the pec. I'm going to take a lacrosse ball, and I am going to, right in front of my shoulder, is in my pec muscle. I don't want to go too far forward this way, so more towards my armpit. I don't want to hit, actually you'll feel a little bony alignment right in here, and you don't want to protrude on that because it's going to be a little uncomfortable. So you're going just inwards right in here. And it should feel like soft tissue as you go in there. So I'm going to try to pin this ball against the wall as then I actively move in a different direction. Okay? So I'm pinning that muscle against the wall here, and then what I'm going to do is I can either rotate my shoulder back and forth or bring it out to the side as I'm maintaining that pressure into the wall. And all I'm trying to do is find those tight spots. So here, I can go up and down, forward, and backwards. And you can do that for, a few minutes, just going back and forth. And like I said, it should be uncomfortable, but it shouldn't recreate that pain in your shoulder if you are experiencing pain. All right, let me show you the next one. This is for your lats. So this one you're going to want to use a foam roll, okay? Where your lats are located is right below your shoulder blade. So right at the bottom on your back side. So I'm going to line my side, find the edge of that shoulder blade. I'm going to rotate just a tiny bit backwards. Okay, and it should feel a little tender in there. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a punching motion with my right arm right here. And I can maneuver my body in a way where I'm applying more pressure into that spot that feels really tight. And all I'm doing is I'm going back and forth, just like this. That spot might not be too bad, so then I'm going to move it up. Rotate a little bit back, and that tends to be a little tighter for me. So I'm going to spend more time right here. And I'm just going back and forth this way. And we're just trying to break up those adhesions, loosen up that muscle. Okay? We do that for a few minutes. The next thing that we're on the floor is using this foam roll to mobilize that mid-spine. So we talk about that spine's always rounded forward. So what I'm going to try to do is bring it backwards. We never make this movement throughout the day, and our spine really needs to get what's called extension throughout the day. Otherwise, you can develop a lot of injuries. So you're going to put that foam roll right in the middle of your back. You can start basically right below your shoulder blades. And what you're going to do is you're going to clasp your hands behind your head, bring your elbows together, feet flat on the floor. You want to make sure your buttocks and feet stay on the floor as you mobilize that backwards this way. You're going to hold 1, 2, 3, and then come back up. 1, 2, 3, and back up. I tend to have a very, very tight thoracic spine, so I don't have a whole lot of mobility here. Something I need to continue to work on. And you're just doing this for about 15 or so repetitions. If you need more, by all means, keep going. It's not like a strengthening exercise. You're not going to fatigue a muscle. The more, the better with that. So that would be the thoracic spine mobilization. And let me show you the last one for the upper trap. So upper trap is this muscle right along our neck that most people tend to get trigger points and a lot of painful spots in. And these are the glory muscles that you see a lot of men tend to overwork, and that creates a whole list of problems. I think it's one of the most overrated muscles in the gym, and people spend way too much time on developing it and not enough time on other muscles. So one way to stretch it is I'm going to take if I want to stretch my right side, I'm going to grab my right hand on a chair like so, and I'm going to try to drop that shoulder and depress it. And I'm going to take my left hand and bring my left ear as far as I can towards my left shoulder. And you should feel a nice, good stretch along this upper trap. And it even might stick out a little bit if it's really tight like mine. And you're just holding that for 30 seconds. And you could do this for a couple sets. If it's uncomfortable afterwards forever, for any reason, it shouldn't be, you know, reach out to a physical therapist, something like that. It should just feel like a slightly uncomfortable stretch as you do it. Okay? All right, so those are the mobilizations that I wanted to talk about. And then we could go over the exercises that I wanted to do or strengthening. So, like I said, these exercises I'm going to show you here, you really don't need much equipment for, especially the first one. The other one, you would need a TheraBand, or if you could find something like a soup can or something heavy, not too heavy, like a jar of pasta sauce or something like that. These are the strength and the external rotators. And these are very, very, very ignored, and people do not do this enough in their exercise routine, is strengthen the muscles that rotate out this way. Right? We only got those two small muscles that do it, and we have so many big, powerful muscles that pull us this way. So we really got to focus in your exercise regime is muscles that are going to rotate you back this way. So a couple different options to strengthen this muscle. One we could use with a TheraBand at home. That's just the resistance band. So you can take a TheraBand and pinch it in between a door, tie a little knot at the end, and that's going to give you some resistance, a good anchor. What you want to do is you're going to grab that resistance band with your thumb pointing up like you're holding a drink and you don't want it to spill. You're going to pinch that shoulder blade back. I like to have a towel in between it. And if you're at the gym, you can do this with the cable machine. And same thing with the handle. You're going to pinch that shoulder blade back, and then you're going to rotate back and forth this way. And you should feel it in that back part of that scapular or shoulder blade, because we're strengthening that infraspinatus and teres minor muscle that I was talking about earlier. And as you see, as I'm doing this, my wrist isn't moving. I don't want my forearm muscles to do it. It's nice locked in place. My shoulder blades pinch back. It's not rounded forward. I'm rotating outwards. I'm not spilling my soup going this way or rotating this way, right in that neutral position. We'll talk about in a second why it's so important to maintain that shoulder in a neutral or external rotation when you have impingement problems in the shoulder. So that's one. The other way we could do this is with a small weight at home. Do side line. So this one you can lie on your side. Like I said, if you have some small dumbbells at home, you could use that. You also use anything you can find around the house. This is just 5 pounds. This is a little light, but jar of pasta sauce is probably around 3 to 5 pounds. But it's that same concept of what you're doing before. You're pinching that shoulder blade back, your thumb's pointing up, and you're just rotating up, hold 1, 2, and down. Back. And this one, even just with 5 pounds, if you do enough repetitions, this is a pretty fatiguing exercise. Like I said, everything we're doing right now is to open up that joint space to reduce that impingement. One of the other exercises I want to show you is that this one you don't need resistance for, is to strengthen our retractors. These are the muscles that pinch our shoulder blade backwards. And these are very underutilized and under-strengthened. So take a towel, roll it up, you're going to put it on your forehead, and you're going to lie on the ground. You're going to rotate your palms facing downwards towards the floor, and you're going to try to maintain a neutral spine in your neck. So your head's not up or down, right in the middle, and you're going to pinch your shoulder blades back, lift your hands slightly off the floor. And you should feel it right between your shoulder blades. That's where the muscles are working. And the common things people tend to do is they try to lift more and more. They either bring their arms too far back and that shoulder tips forward, and that causes some impingement, or they shrug. And then all you're doing is you're just teaching your body to keep strengthening that upper trap, and that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. We're trying to shut this one down, get the other muscles, which pinch your shoulder blades back, to work a little harder. Here, palms down. Pinch. Hold 1, 2, 3. Pinch. 1, 2, 3. And then relax. Sets and reps are usually 10 to 15 reps is usually pretty good for something like that. As far as repetitions, maybe 3 sets a day with that, but that's a really good exercise. If you're just sitting on the couch all day after you've done some of the mobilizations, is then, okay, right afterwards is, okay, now that those muscles are in a better position, is okay, go and strengthen them. All right. Just a few more things here. All right, so now that we went over things, the just kind of summary is the goal is always to create more space in that joint. So we talked about that tendon. If it's that space is decreased, it's kind of like a rope over a piece of metal, and over time it starts fraying if there's not enough joint space. So big things is always stretch and mobilize before you do any type of lifting or workout at home or at the gym, especially if you have an occupation where you sit all day. Number 2 is emphasize strengthening your posterior chain. Remember that push-pull ratio of 1 to 2. Try to get things where you're pulling backwards versus pushing forward. So 1 to 2 ratio there. Strengthen your external rotators. Those are the exercises I was just doing, which rotate you out this way. We overdevelop our muscles that rotate us inwards. We really underutilize those external rotators. Another thing is avoid using too many machines at the gym. A lot of times, yes, you could adjust the height of those machines, but it really puts you posturally at a disadvantage, especially if you're doing some like overhead press or military press machines, and could lead to a lot of impingements. I hate the machine at the gym where you're rotating up this way. Strengthen your delts. If you see I'm internally rotated, I'm literally, I'm taking that joint space, I'm closing it down as much as I can. Then I'm adding weight, and I'm just jamming that rotator cuff tendon into the top of that ceiling of that subacromial joint space. So not a good idea there. And then lastly, I wanted to go over is performing exercises in the scapular plane, which we'll talk about in keeping your shoulder in a neutral or external rotation position. So the scapular plane, if we bring the arm straight out to the side, that's our abduction plane. So if you're doing lateral raises, let's say with a dumbbell, and it's painful, try bringing your arms 30 degrees forward. And the reason that's a little bit better is because that joint space opens up, and that has to do with how the shoulder blade sits in the back of your spine. So if I'm doing a lateral raise, my thumb's up, it's not down because I'm closing down that joint base. So thumb up, and I'm lifting up, I'm trying not to shrug that shoulder. I'm at that 30-degree plane and down. And the slower the better with these guys. You could really fatigue this muscle even with small weights just by doing this exercise correctly, using small weights at home and going nice and slow. So you can see I'm in that scapular plane. I'm in neutral, meaning my thumb's up. I'm not rotated down in the internal rotation. I'm in neutral, or I'm in external rotation as well. Those are some helpful hips. Even sometimes dips at home. If you're trying to do those, a lot of times people are doing dips, right? They're here and they're pushing away. And that tends to be, especially for me, if I do it that way, I get immediate pain and impingement in my syndrome. So what I have to do, if I'm grabbing a bench behind me, I have to rotate my arms outwards and then do a dip as I'm lowering my hips down towards the floor. So I'm creating that external rotation. I'm opening up that joint space, less impingement, less pain, less long-term consequences. Okay, so that is all I have today as far as for presentation and demonstration. Hopefully you guys have some good questions. Real quick before that, just some reminders. We have a presentation that's going to be happening pretty much every week. Next week's going to be by one of our therapists, Missy, on yoga. These webinars, like I said, will be weekly, sometimes multiple times per week. We have telehealth appointments available. If you don't feel comfortable coming to the clinic, we are still open. We do have telehealth appointments available, which insurance does cover, so feel free to ask about that. And then if you have questions, my email, for whatever reason the slide didn't attach, but my email is kmartin@bereact.com. Always feel free to shoot me questions afterwards. And so let's open it up and see if you guys have any questions. Let's see. Okay, no questions. Otherwise, I just want to tell you guys, all our locations are open. Once again, I'm at the Lakeshore East location by Maggie Daly Park. Feel free, if you guys have any questions, shoot some right now. I'll leave this open for another minute or so. But yeah. So someone asked, do we have virtual training? Yes, so we do these telehealth appointments. So I could absolutely assess you. We have a specific HIPAA compliant documentation or system that we use to do a video analysis, take a look at you and see what's going on. Obviously, it's not as ideal as you coming into the clinic, but we can do an evaluation and I could get a pretty good idea of what's going on just by your history and just how you're moving and try to give you some tips for at home, things to adjust. So we could absolutely do a telehealth appointment. You can just feel free to reach out to our clinic. Our phone number is 312-929-3646. And then my email, once again, is kmartin@bereact.com. Like I said, we also are still open, so we could do those in-person clinics. We have, we have masks for patients to wear here. I'm wearing masks. We're, doing everything we can sanitary-wise to keep it a sterile environment in here. So we are still open as well. Let's see the other question here. So someone was asking about releasing their triceps, and that when they release their triceps, they get a lot of pain relief afterwards, and why that would make sense. And so actually a really great question. And so what we've found is that tricep connects to the bottom or inferior fossa of that scapular or shoulder blade. So if that scapular or that triceps tight, it's going to pull that shoulder blade outwards too much. And we talked about that scapulohumeral rhythm. If that thing's rotated or too tight and pulling it outwards, that rhythm's going to be off. So by you releasing it, it's going to hopefully create a little bit more elasticity in that muscle, and then that scapula is going to start moving a little bit better. It also, there's some reflexive patterns that when you release the tricep, your upper trap tends to relax as well. So when you're doing things, you don't get that elevation in your scapula as much as well. So yeah, that's great you're doing that. So keep up with that. Any other questions? All right, if nobody has any other questions, well, here we go. Can you give me an example of a good exercise for tightness pain in the teres major? Yeah, absolutely. So we could develop trigger points in here as well. So same thing, we're gonna use a lacrosse ball. We're gonna try to break up or release that muscle. It's not as common, but we can get some restrictions in there. So let me show you how to do that. What's that?
Exit pushers.
Okay. All right. So Rebecca's gonna move this around. Hopefully you guys can see it. So you're gonna take that lacrosse ball and you're gonna put it behind that shoulder blade. So your infraspinatus and teres is in the bottom part of your shoulder blade, right here. So if you imagine that shoulder blade like a triangle, it's gonna be in the bottom half of that triangle. And you'll find it when you put the ball in there. It's gonna, if you have a trigger point there, it's gonna be pretty intense. So you're gonna wanna put that ball there and lie on it. Or you could use the foam roll, either or. So there's my infraspinatus, and right there is that muscle externally and internally rotates. So what we're gonna do is go in and out this way with the ball. But the ball is pretty intense for release at home if you have a nasty trigger point. If you want to go make it a little less intense, warm up into it, use the foam roll instead, same thing. So unlike the lat where we went a little bit lower in the back, we're just going up a little bit higher into that shoulder blade. And then you're just rotating back and forth this way. That should help release that muscle. Let's see. What is a good exercise for pain going down into the elbow? So that is a much more complicated answer. If you have pain going down the elbow, that could sometimes indicate some like neural involvement, some nerve impingement. So it could be coming actually from your cervical spine, not always, or that nerve could be entrapped in that shoulder and referring pain down. My biggest suggestion with that is trying to loosen up your upper traps, which I talked about, but I'll show you another exercise for chin tucks, which tends to relieve a lot of neurotension that's coming from our neck. So what you're gonna do, sit with good posture. So you're gonna start shoulder blades pinched together. And all you're gonna do is if you imagine a rope was behind your head and pulling back, you're gonna give yourself a triple chin as you bring your head backwards. So from the front, it's kind of an awkward looking exercise, and I'm not dipping down, I'm not dipping up. I'm going straight back. Obviously, if that's recreating your pain or making things worse or make it go down, stop doing that exercise, but that's a good start. But if it's getting worse, that sounds like something that you would be a good candidate for PT and to actually go see a therapist for, because once, if it is nerve involvement, those injuries can get pretty bad pretty quickly. Okay. Any other questions before we wrap it up here? Okay. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining me. Like I said, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. Email kmartin@bereact.com. We have telehealth appointments, and feel free to come into our clinics. Thank you.